Good afternoon, everyone. It is really a very special privilege to be here with my colleagues upon our return for a very special visit to China, China including Hong Kong, Tibet, and Beijing. I'm honored to be here with the chair of our Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, Congressman Jim McGovern of Massachusetts, Congresswoman Joyce. Climate change in the state legislature credentials which he will discuss, fresh eyes, and the next president of China. When he had expressed to him climate change on issues that relate to responsibilities and brought to his attention the concern of autonomy. He said at the time, I considered the trip constructive, bridge building, and we want to continue that bridge through reconciliation and understanding. And our members will see those issues. I'm pleased to yield now to I called him, what did I call you? The spiritual leader of our trip, Tom Lantos.
For me to be part of it. Everywhere in Beijing, we talked about Tibet, we talked about His Holiness the Dalai Lama, we talked about human rights and the importance of respect for officials, and especially with university students both in Tibet and Beijing. I saw this trip, and especially the delegation's visit to Tibet, as an important gesture by the Chinese visa to travel to Tibet in many years. So this is an important gesture. But more needs to be done, and we must find ways to build on this visit and make the reforms needed for meaningful change, such as, one, allowing the United States to open a consulate in Lhasa, Tibet. Two, allowing more members of Congress, more journalists, more members of parliament from other nations, and more people in general, including members of the Tibetan community here in the issues of Tibetan autonomy, religious practice, culture, and heritage, are stuck in the past and old prejudices. The issue is not the past. The issue is the future of Tibet and its people. Renewing dialogue must be genuine and productive, and it cannot be just another guise for wasting time or going through the motions, but a dialogue based on good faith and the mutual need to resolve outstanding issues in a way that is acceptable to all parties. Undertaking such initiatives would be a positive reflection on the capacity of Chinese authorities to engage in constructive dialogue and increase confidence that the government is committed to reconciliation and ending abuses in Tibet. The Chinese government has invested a great deal in Tibet, and that was very clear to us. But that investment should not come at the price of an entire culture. You cannot confine a people's culture and heritage, their very sense of identity, to a museum or a market of handicrafts. The human rights of the Tibetan people must be strengthened and protected, and I will continue to work with my colleagues in Congress, with the leader, to push for the reforms needed to achieve this. Again, I view this trip as a very productive step and a very important first step toward resolving some of these important issues.
Good afternoon. I'm Betty McCollum from Minnesota, and I want to associate myself with the remarks made by Leader Pelosi and my colleague, Mr. McGovern. But I'm going to talk about something that I felt very positive about, and that is China and the United States coming together to tackle climate change. We had the opportunity to be in the lack of experience firsthand, as you can tell, as the most developed country, and China as a large developing country. The harmful effects of carbon pollution as very back here, and encourage my fellow members of Congress to do more to reach out to not only Chinese government but other governments on renewable energy, as we do in Minnesota. Have China at the table to talk about what we can move forward. Chinese people are very, very serious about addressing this pollution problem, as I know my constituents and my fellow Minnesotans and the majority of people here in the United States are. So where there's much work to be done in dialogue on human rights, much work to be done on better people-to-people exchanges and protecting the Tibetan culture and working towards freedom of religion. The common ground that we are coming together between our two presidents and what I believe are two people the Chinese people and the American people to do something about climate change, I think creates more hope and opportunity for more dialogue on how we can move forward to not only protect our planet, but maybe how we can have an even more peaceful world in the future.
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank Leader Pelosi and my colleagues. I'm Tim Walz. I represent Minnesota's 1st Congressional District. My engagement in China dates back to the late 1980s when I was part of the first group of American high school teachers to teach in Chinese high schools and spent time there. And I think it's obvious by this trip and the access that we were given that the Chinese value this relationship with the United States very much, and that's a positive sign. I mentioned to one of our hosts when we got to Tibet that I had been to Tibet. I said, I think it was in late 1989, and he quickly corrected me and said, no, it was February of 90. So it was good. I thought pre-computers I might have done something. On that trip, it took me 6 days by bus to get there. This time we landed at an airport alongside the train tracks that were there. There's no doubt, as anyone knows, the modernization of China over the last 25 years has been nothing short of spectacular when it comes to infrastructure and improvements in quality of life, access to clean water, access to healthcare services, and those things are undeniable. And I think China rightfully feels a sense of pride on that. I also think over the years of watching this in interactions with friends of mine and watching on this trip, I think it's probably safe to say that the human rights aspects are lagging a little behind and coming up. And in all fairness, the discussions, I would have never imagined being in the deepest enclaves of Chinese government with some of their highest levels of officials having a debate about the Dalai Lama, about healthcare, and a spirit forth where they, McCollum and others up here, Native American situation has gone from, thank you, voices up here, if this security issues of containment of with an acknowledgement that there's a ways to go. So thank you.
Colleagues, and thanking Lieu for this opportunity. For my career in education, I was delighted to have the opportunity to education is the economic engine of the future. At the students that there was the third student who was clearly an activist, who not only said thank you for being there, but thank you for listening that we don't have, that you have in America. There are human rights issues there. So beginning, and what a wonderful opportunity to change some things that we know can be better. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Congressman Lowenthal from California. I too want to echo the thoughts and statements of my colleagues. It was a very powerful experience for all of us. I think the parts that made it the most for me or touched me the most is that we went to listen, we went to understand, but we also went to be able to express our differences. And I think the one concept that I think allowed us to move forward was that the Chinese saw that we came with respect. We differed on issues. We strongly talked about human rights issues. We talked about issues on what is the rule of law. We talked about issues about the arrest. What does it mean to have people arrested? But we spoke in a way of respect. And we also, I think, came to a general understanding, both with the officials and with the students, that the greatest crisis confronting both China and the United States and Tibet within China was climate change. That whether it was the pollution that we experienced in Beijing, which was at a very high level and was very difficult for us. I too come back with a raspy voice after being there, but also an understanding that it will take the leadership of China and the United States to deal with this problem that is so interrelated that pollution in Beijing affects us here in Washington, D.C. There is no safe place. And so I think that acknowledgement and that understanding really helped us move forward and to deal with some of the issues that the Chinese found more difficult for us to work with. Thank you.
I'm Congressman Ted Lieu from Southern California. It was a joy and an honor to be on the delegation with Leader Pelosi and my colleagues. It was a successful diplomatic mission that built upon the previous visit of President Xi Jinping to the United States. And everywhere we went, whether it was Hong Kong or Tibet or Beijing, we raised the issue of cybersecurity. It's an issue that knows no boundaries, and we commended the Chinese government for negotiating a landmark agreement with the United States that essentially said the two leading economies in the world are not going to steal the intellectual property of each other's businesses. And as China starts to have its own intellectual property, they have come to realize that in the long run, it is to their detriment if they can't protect their own be enforced. And it's also being used as a model with other countries now. On a related issue, to remain honest between China and the U.S., when we don't Google, such as Facebook and other, will become competitor, and your consumers will have more choice. We are hopeful that they will.
Was here concerned about Dalai Lama when I said, and Senator, about autonomy, not about trip. It's something, first time I saw His Holiness was here in 1988, and his whole message was about autonomy. So if they think it's about independence, he's to find common ground. Also, the Chinese have done a remarkable, and I've said this on previous visits within the past several years, that they have done amazing work addressing the climate change issue and how they invest in China is one of the reflections of that. Well, it was old China, and now it's new China. They said, but before we act what the Chinese government has done throughout China, tell the story. That's very important. So, of course, Dalai Lama have in his commitment to autonomy, we also want to see a perpetuation of Tibetan culture and gild the temple roof, the roof of the temple, education and the perpetuation of the again, the culture happening to the culture. Well, I think that you consider the source. Mr. McGovern, would you?
So,
His Irish name.
yeah, I know. As I said, I'll just repeat. I mean, we continue to be concerned about the human rights situation in Tibet, and about religious freedom issues, and about people's ability to be able to live a life that they want. We had some very heated exchanges with Chinese government officials over a whole range of issues involving Tibet, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Some were more heated than others. Some drew a line in the sand. Some discussions I felt there was, and I think that's how we come to this issue. Chinese government is willing to, in some constructive dialogue that can help promote reconciliation. Chinese government will agree to do X, Y, and our challenge is to work with our and visit, and we're hopeful that they'll begin lawyers thing and passing out leaflets involving, so the Chinese government knows that those issues are still.
Our final, again, respectful, and with the recognition that the cooperation between America and China is world. I think they had a pretty good idea of what we accepted as containment of our activity there. But again, anyway, my colleagues, any comment on the restrictions or anything?
I just want to people. We respect that you're here, but you've got to give us some space around us, and so we had to work out that kind of relationship.
I think it's fair to say that I think the Chinese government wanted to control as much of our visit to Tibet as they could, and we saw what they wanted us to see. We also saw things that they didn't want us to see, and I think what they didn't count on was the tenacity of Leader Pelosi, who wanted to visit religious sites, who wanted to visit monasteries, and who insisted and kind of wore some of these officials down so that we were able to see what we wanted to see as well. I felt like we got a wide perspective of life in Tibet, and we went to the meetings at the China. to the Tibetan people, to our constituents.
Read what's not in the paper is what's important, and to look what you're not seeing. So it became obvious when you're.
I think 30 is probably a conservative. There were people who, shall we say, had walkie-talkies that down the path, and right from the start, kind of complained that there was too much tashi doing that, but we did. And like in November, to be in India in March. Actually, Tom and left us. So this was after the crackdown in Tibet. The Chinese protest what was happening we would have been protesting it wherever we were. Minister of India to, it was part of a trip to India that we also had a priority to plan, but a purpose. So after about human rights, we focused on climate change then, and we are continuing that conversation because the ecology environment there as they are in the rest for a number of years before. But why don't you ask questions and then we'll answer them all. We landed in Tibet. We didn't even know if we were to go to Tibet, but until we actually got there, was covering the trip. Now, I think because there are many journalists in Beijing, but there are, Tibet is Lhasa is a different story, and I think whether it's opening an embassy, and they talked about, a consulate, they talked about exchange students, more exchange students between our two countries. Well, that would speak to having a consulate there to address the needs of families visiting or students going there. So we think that there's some openings that could happen that would be very wholesome. Yes, ma'am, what's this last one? We didn't have that conversation with the Chinese, but we were told that what they have said, because the immolations have been reduced in number, and how it was explained to us, not by the Chinese government, but that the threats to the families of the monks or nuns who had self-immolated was what had deterred a further number, and that was very, very sad news to us. Yes, sir, just very quickly, because we have votes. Yeah. Does anyone want to speak to our
I think
regular people?
I think that, and we were received there, and I think culture. There were other people that would squeeze our hand and be so excited that we could lands.
And did we see families? I hope so. They were very nice people. I didn't see any family photos in the place, but nonetheless, again, I'm so proud of my delegation, their values, their knowledge, purpose. No matter what they want to see or what you see beyond, supports autonomy, not independence. If they know that we're about the culture because of the dilution of their own culture in their own country. So it was a wonder if they knew what that was. The officials who greeted us